All right. See if I can get this together here. Sorry. All right. Just presenting to our instructors here. Again, my name is David Bent, Professor Anila, if I pronounced that correctly. I think we correspond a little bit with Zoom. Uh, Thank you for this great course and all your help, and all the instructors' help as well. So for this extra credit, I decided to do a narrative presentation on cellular enzyme catalase, excuse me, for respiration. So seeing as I work in the medical field as critical care paramedic and also respiratory therapist, I'm really big on the respiratory side of things and how things actually work from the enzyme level. So with that being said, I was just kind of moving forward, but of course we know by definition catalase is a tetrameric heme protein, which we know that heme has to do a lot with blood, and within our blood we also have iron, which is also important to help the strengthening of the blood flow throughout our bodies. And of course, it's one of the major intracellular antioxidants, and it also has a lot to do with the detoxifying the hydrogen peroxide produced by or under physiological conditions such as water or oxygen. And basically, what that means, it just helps, I guess you can say, filters or refreshes the intake of catalase and to help the flow and in the corrective uh, flow of energy and also oxygen and water throughout our bodies. And it's kind of similar to how like blood actually flows through our bodies. So obviously, it's we have oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. So deoxygenated blood typically flows through the heart. Not to get too further into it, but just kind of quickly describe that blood flows through the heart, deoxygenated until it enters the lungs. Now, when it gets to the lungs and leaves the lungs, it becomes oxygenated and travels throughout the rest of the equation or through the heart. So that's pretty much the blood flow through the heart. All right, so I also wanted to touch on some disease processes that has to do with catalase. So one of the big things they look at today's study is pulmonary fibrosis. So pulmonary fibrosis is actually a restrictive type disease, lung disease, and within that, it can become chronic, and so what's actually going on in the lungs is that they are stiffening. And they're stiffening within the lungs that does not allow for total gas exchange, and those patients usually we find that they tend to have to be on oxygen all the time. So they cannot be off. They cannot be off oxygen. They cannot have room air oxygen. They need purified 100% O2. And this lung disease is nearly pretty much like a permanent damage to the lungs, parenchyma, and it has various patterns of inflammation throughout the lung cavity and thoracic cavity, and unfortunately, the mortality rate can be very very high. Um, because even the available medical therapy may not be enough. So, in all honesty, what's really going to cure that is by that person actually getting a lung transplant, so to speak. So, and what's also happening with this disease is that there becomes a imbalance or oxidants and antioxidants that alters the pathogens. So it's like a pathogenesis effect within the pulmonary fibrosis, and it builds up or activates causes the activation of redox sensitive within the signaling pathways, and becomes a strand and develops transcription factors. And obviously, when that happens, just like I described before, it alters gas exchange. So when it alters gas exchange, it can also alter and have abnormal immune functions. It can also cause some abnormal protease and anti-protease balances, and unfortunately develops and activates fibroblasts as well. Within that can cause some inflammation within the cells, also from neutrophils, and unfortunately that releases toxic oxidants, and that are capable of inducing the oxidant mediated lung paracom cell toxicity throughout the fibrosis, the actual fibrosis process. So, just kind of look further into this process. So I found out this. I did a little bit more research, and I found out there's actually some foods that contain catalase, and so the cruciferous vegetables. So what that actually includes like broccoli, cabbage, kale, and cauliflower. I guess turnip greens, which are very rich in catalase. And eating plenty of these, the green leafy leaf vegetables, also stimulates the body to produce catalase. So that's just kind of some interesting facts there. So the actual cellular environment production within catalase, so like I kind of mentioned it before, it's produces within water molecules and also oxygen, and becomes like energy efficient man becomes an energy efficient manner, and that then becomes actually exposed to the environmental stress. And within that, the catalase is actually located mostly in these major sites, with H2O, um, in the cellular environment, such as like the peroxisomes, mitochondria, the cytosols, and chloroplasts of higher plants. So it's also a tetramer of four polypeptides. So that's kind of interesting. So it's four polypeptides chains, and within that, it actually contains four also porphyrin hemogroups that allows the enzymes to react with hydrogen peroxide. Now, the optimum pH of human catalase is actually 7, so that's pretty much like our optimal per hydrogen acid level of 7. And the optimal temperature, of course, we know is 37 degrees Celsius, which is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So when we're looking at like catalase and aerobic not metabolism, but respiration, uh, that obviously we all know that it requires oxygen. So what actually happens in the electron transport chain is that most of the time oxygen accepts electrons and forms the water. So, and sometimes instead of forming the water, it also can also form hydrogen peroxide, which of course we know that it can be very toxic to organisms, and it can also break down catalase. That's why I use hydrogen peroxide for like sometimes for cuts and treatments. That just kind of wipes out any potential infections to prevent that from actually happening. So catalase is also produced by nearly all aerobic organisms, and anaerobic organisms do not produce catalase. Just kind of FYI on that one. Um, so this is kind of just the structure I found of catalase, like a biochemical type structure. So, and basically each color means that the catalase has different functions of how it can actually affect different areas of the body, like the human body, or even like plants and animals and things. I also picked out another disease. This is E. coli with the catalase. So just kind of explaining it with it. So here's the environment at the very top of it. So it produces, like we mentioned before, you see the H2O at the top. So what happens is that actually passes through the membrane, through periplasm or the cytoplasm, connects with NADH and NAD plus, and also adds the Fe, which also stands for the iron. That is a part of the heme root that we mentioned about, and then it becomes um, aerobic, that requires the H2O or the oxygen within catalase and peroxidase, and in return ends up developing a CCP promoter. Hopefully, I explained that correctly and make sure it's understanding. All right. So my reference, just kind of page a little bit more information if you're interested in learning more about catalase and any disease processes related to that, degenerative or oxidative. It's a good area to actually look more further in and actually study. Hope you enjoy. Appreciate your time.